If you just go on Google and you kind of punch this stuff in, it's actually completely misleading. Insane level of stimulus and quantitative easing and all these protocols that have been rolled out. The Fed basically has technically an infinite balance sheet.
I was looking where we're supposed to get Q3 GDP results in the next week or so here. And obviously, the U.S. has had huge fiscal stimulus, not just fiscal stimulus, but the Fed has just been printing money. I think they have over a $7 trillion balance sheet at this point. So that's called quantitative easing. And basically what that means is the Fed is injecting huge amounts of just liquidity into markets. And that's also, I think, a big reason why you see just the stock market in general doing so well. There's been some additional attention kind of looking at just how aggressive. Yeah, here it is. The Fed's balance sheet hits new record highs. QE takes a spotlight. The Fed's outright holdings of U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities is now at $6.56 trillion. Wow. Now, this is on the Fed's balance sheet. The Fed basically has technically an infinite balance sheet. When you rewind the clock and we look at, what the Fed's balance sheet was for, pre the 2008 crisis, it was nowhere near $6.5 trillion. I'm going to pull it up here. This is their total assets. You can see here a spike in 08, 09. With the crisis 12 years ago, and then see 2013, 2014, and then 2015, it started to kind of level it off. This is what you call QE, or quantitative easing, or quantitative tightening. So are they kind of putting more liquidity out there, or are they bringing back liquidity? So now we're around $6.5 trillion. If you look now back here pre-2008, they had less than $1 billion of assets on their balance sheet. So there's just a monumental rise here in just cash and liquidity that the Fed has been injecting into the system, which certainly directly correlates to stocks and how the market is doing. There's really no end in sight, at least from what they've been signaling here. This is a good one here. This is another good chart. So you can see that, 2016, 2017, where it leveled off, then it actually started to decrease, tightening. So 18, 19, they were actually tightening the balance sheet, which is a good thing, right? Because essentially, if you think about what kind of, ammunition do they have, this easing is going to help stabilize the market and bring more liquidity. So they're essentially just like, for example, if you are increasing the interest rates, right? What the Fed says is interest rate, as they increase that, then they have more ammunition in their repertoire to use by lowering interest rates when a crisis, or in this case, a pandemic hits. Now they've gone just full on easing, and we're off this chart entirely at this point. This level of stimulus, both from the federal government providing trillions of dollars in aid, we had the PPP program, we've had checks given to people that are unemployed. We've had, a variety of different federal stimulus programs, and the Fed and the federal government have actually worked in tandem to put a lot of these programs into place. It's for another episode. It's very interesting how they've gone about doing it. Anyway, long story short, U.S. has had unprecedented stimulus, both at the federal government level and at the Federal Reserve level. Certainly, I would say well beyond what the EU has done. The EU has also been taking activity at the central bank and at the the EU has passed stimulus at the EU level. But when you look around and you just go on Google and you try and say, hey, what happened to the U.S. GDP in Q2? This is the featured article on Google. Oh, so I clicked into this. U.S. GDP Q2 2020. It says it decreased 34%. I'm just like, oh, wow, that's not good. 34%. That's a pretty big decrease, right? Then I go and look up what happened to the EU. And then, boom, here's the top article for the EU, that their GDP went down 12%. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why? How is the US going down over 30%? The EU is going down 12%. And basically, that's because if you just go on Google and you kind of punch this stuff in, it's actually completely misleading and it's actually wrong. I mean, that's not true. There's just different ways. These reports that 30% is looking at something completely different than an apples to apples comparison to say, hey, relatively, how have these economies done in Q2? And then, now we'll see if we can, as different states and countries have slowly started to reopen, what will we see in terms of a bounce back? What level of bounce back will we see? Now, this article, much harder to find, actually does a pretty good job of doing an apples to apples comparison. And what you see here is that actually the US GDP growth rate in Q2 was about 9%. So negative 9%, right? So negative growth rate. Okay. 9%, very different than 34%. Compare that to Germany, which was a touch under 10%. And actually China, interestingly enough, here at 10%, which, I mean, who knows how to believe that number, but anyway, the reported number is negative 10%. And so basically the EU zone is actually roughly that 12% number that I was just showing you. And you have the US at 9%. So interesting to see Japan here at roughly looks like 7%, and Australia the lowest amongst the countries in this analysis. So it'll be very interesting to see what the rebound does. But in terms of that Q2 impact, if you're comparing the US and Europe actually had about a 30% greater decline in their GDP growth rate, negative growth rate, that is, as compared to the US's decline, right? US at 9%, EU at 12%. I think some of that has to be attributed to the just insane level of stimulus and quantitative easing and all these protocols that have been rolled out by the Fed and by the central government and the central bank. It's just unprecedented the amount of programs they've put into place in short order. So now, the proof is always in the pudding. And the pudding will come out in the next couple of weeks here when we see, okay, so maybe it slowed a little bit of the decline in Q2, but how much of this is actually helping to accelerate a rebound in Q3? Hopefully that's the result. We'll see what that result is in the coming days and week or two here. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.